Tara Lynn with 5 Acres Honey Farm. Welcome back. Today I'm going to share a little bit about the hickory nuts. And here in the Piedmont area of North Carolina, one of the native trees are hickory nuts. The hickory nut tree, there's a bunch of different varieties. There are plenty of videos and resources out there that can help you identify like what kind of hickory nut trees you might have. I'm not really going into those details. I'm going into more of the delicious side of the hickory nuts. And you might see these around, and this is an immature fruit from the tree, so that the nut is inside this husk. And then this is a more mature one, and they very conveniently pop off these little sides in quarters, which reveals the nut below. And the husk you can use, if you're grilling, any kind of campfires, and just smoking to give some aromatics. And the nut itself is extremely difficult to crack. Some of the things that I'll be sharing with you did not happen in one day. It takes a really long time to harvest what's in here, and if you have ever harvested hickory nuts, or if you're about to, you will greatly appreciate the power of squirrels' teeth, because I really didn't understand it until cracking these open, and the squirrels just seem to bite into this like it's a piece of bread. But I use a press to crack these. Inside the nut meat itself, if you haven't tried it before, a lot of people describe it as like a combination of like a pecan and a walnut. And I know there are like 5 different ways to say pecan, but I associate it more with the walnut. It's much more oily, and depending on the maturity of the nut when you harvest it, one nut's going to taste a little bit different than another. My husband doesn't care for them too much, but I like the unique flavor that they have, and I also appreciate how difficult it is to harvest and access the meat and the flesh of the nut that's inside of here. I also like that it's just this treat that comes once a year, and then we can make things with it. Last year, I seemed to miss when the hickory nuts fell. I kind of realized it later in the fall. I'm like, when did it happen? This year was the absolute best hickory nut harvest I have ever had. The nuts, they were at the right maturity. The weather has cooperated, and it hasn't been super rainy, so the nuts are fairly dry, and they're just in really great condition. I'll kind of show you the process as I actually picked up and selected the nuts, and how I've extracted the meat out of most of them, and then what I'm going to be doing in different ways of cooking with them. It is a gorgeous fall day, and the hickory nut trees that we have a bunch on the property, but a lot of them are near the chicken coop, so it's really easy to keep an eye on the maturity level of when they're ready to harvest. I'm finding a lot of what look like really great nuts right now, which is awesome. And here's an example of what I'm looking for. So a husk that's not entirely green, so that it's more brown, shows a level of maturity. This looks really clean inside. I don't see any spores or pests, and this will be a good one to bring inside. Strike that, I take it back. There, it looks like there's a little worm right there, if you can see that teeny tiny little spot right there. So with hickory nuts, you can do a float test, and the ones that float are no good, just like eggs. The nuts look absolutely fantastic. Like, this flesh is really bright and clear, and it's really accessible. I've just been using a little nut pick to pull it out, and everything that's left over, I'm putting in that pot, and I'll make hickory nut chai tea with that. This is my little helper, Cleo. After I finish scraping it out, there's still a little bit left in there, but that's fine, because that will be going into that chai tea I mentioned. So how I'm going to start the hickory nut chai is I've just got the hulls and some of the nut meat still in here. I'm going to add a few sticks of cinnamon and cloves and I'm gonna let this simmer after I fill it up, about 2 inches of water over the surface of all of this, and I'll let it simmer for a few hours. All right, I've got the hickory nut chai simmering on the stove, and I wanted to show you how much you can kind of see in here. It's approximately a cup and a half, I'm thinking, of the actual nuts. So like you can snack on these, you know, put them in granola, muffins. One thing I did the other night, no photos or anything, but I had marinated pork chops in some honey, and then when I was searing it, I usually sear the pork chops and then put them in the oven for a few minutes. So I seared them, put some more honey on top of them, and then also sprinkled the hickory nuts right on top. And then I just baked it for like 4 minutes, just really brief time, just enough to kind of like, you know, toast the nuts a bit. So I had those, and then now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a portion of these nuts and I'm going to soak them and make, you know, just a nut milk out of it. And then the other thing that I'm doing is making the chai, and then I'm thinking I might dehydrate some of these and store them. Basically from making the nut milk, once I strain the nuts after they have, you know, been soaking and I make the milk, I'm going to make a no-bake cookie with them, which I have another recipe that I usually rely on for these no-bake cookies that's nut-based. So this is the first time I'm making them with the hickory nuts as the base. I'm straining this, got a double strainer. And I'm gonna do one more strain after this, but there's a lot in here. Okay, I have this spare, very fine tea strainer, and so I just poured it. This is my kind of third, oops, it's a little blurry with the steam. It's like a triple filter method, I guess, between the 2 strainers and this little tea infuser. So now I've got my chai, so I can add some sweetener to it. You might remember from an earlier video that I have North Carolina maple syrup, so I'll be using that to sweeten the chai. I have a case of this, but it's definitely dwindling. Okay, I just made the chai, and it is absolutely amazing. It's way better than I expected it to be. I have this new little mug that I got at the farmer's market last week, and it's like the perfect little vessel for it. It's got a little indent for your thumb, so you can just hang out with it. It has this really great fall-esque, you know, obviously tastes like chai, but it just has this more homey kind of essence to it. It's hard to describe. I highly recommend making it. What's really nice now is all of the spent nutshells are all going in the compost, and this ended up yielding a quart of the hickory nut chai, and I'm going to enjoy it while it's warm. I'm going to put some in the fridge so that I could heat some up for the next few days, and I'll probably put the rest in the freezer and just enjoy it through the winter. And I just meant to show you, this is the hickory nut chai. This is how dark it is. You know, the hulls have a lot of darkness to them. I only used 1.5 sticks of cinnamon and maybe 4 cloves. I used whole cloves in simmering it. So this is really a product of how dark the hickory nut husks, actually not the husks, but the actual hickory nut shell, what they can produce. To make the hickory nut milk, same process for making any type of nut milk. Let's get started. I soaked the hickory nuts for 2 hours and then strained, and then added the equal amount of water back in, pureed it in the food processor, and now I'm straining in cheesecloth to get the milk out. So I just made a teeny amount of the hickory nut milk. I wasn't expecting to make very much. I only used about 1/3 cup of the nuts in making the milk. The rest of the nuts I've just put on a silicone baking sheet, and I'm putting it in the oven at 250 for about a half an hour to dry out the nuts before making the no-bake cookies with them. I'm gonna save this for my coffee tomorrow morning. Also planning on putting a little bit of this hickory nut milk in the hickory nut chai that I made, so I can make a little hickory nut chai latte with it. And it actually, I was concerned it was gonna not taste very good because it's such a high oil content in the hickory nuts. I imagine because of that high oil content, it would probably go rancid a lot faster. So my plan is to make sure I use this in the next 24 hours. I've tried it on its own without any sweetener, and I would totally drink this on its own. But given the effort to harvest the hickory nuts, I'm just going to be really happy with my little third of a cup. Actually, this might be a little bit more that's in here, but I'll just be happy with this little bit. All right, I did equal parts the hickory nuts that have just come out of the oven, the oats, and then I'm gonna do, it's just, you know, whatever your preference is, but I'll probably do about a tablespoon or two of honey, and I'm gonna be using an equal amount of sunflower seed butter, and you can use any kind of fruit you have on hand, any dried fruit like cranberries or raisins, but I happen to have some apricots in the pantry, so I'm gonna put a few of those in here. And then I melted about 1/8, maybe a little bit more than 1/8, it might be closer to 1/4 actually, it might be a little bit double, of coconut oil. And I'm gonna blend all of that together, shape it, and then refrigerate it. Okay, strike the apricot thing. I just opened it and they were really fuzzy. They were from our road trip over the summer. I thought because they were dried they would have lasted, but didn't work there. So now I've got the sunflower seed butter. I also put the little powder on the right is a reishi powder that I have on the mushroom. I figured I'll just put that in to make it even healthier. And you can put in, you know, whatever kind of supplements you might have on hand, like protein powders and things. I also have maca, and if you wanted this to be more of like a chocolatey flavor, you could put cacao in here too. So now that everything's in here, it is time to blend. I just wanted to show you. So I ended up adding about 1/4 cup extra oats because it looked way too soupy. I think that's because I put a little bit more coconut oil in it than I had intended. And this is the kind of texture you want to see, where it's like pulling apart and almost kind of balling in a way. So I'm going to use just a regular spoon. I'm going to take these out and shape them. Voila! I shaped them, put them in the fridge for a few hours, and now time to dig in. So it's a little later in the day, but I put the cookies in the fridge to set for a little bit, and it ended up yielding about 14 little cookies. And those were the 3 ways of preparing hickory nuts. And I'd love to hear if you have some other recipes.